All right, welcome back to Niners Nightly. Matt Barrows from The Athletic joins us. Niners beat writer for The Athletic, does an incredible job covering the team, and he's with us on the UMA guest line to talk about his latest piece, which is fantastic. And it really compares the Niner rebuild to what the Rams did recently. And I thought, if you're a Niner fan looking for some meaning and some direction and some guidance as to what all these moves mean and or potentially could mean about the upcoming season and have a little perspective on the whole thing. I think Matt provides that with this piece, and he's with us to discuss it. Matt, thanks for a few minutes.
Thanks for having me on, Larry.
Well, it's awesome to have you on. This is a great piece, and I guess I got to ask you, where did it come from? I know your recollection is pretty good, and you probably had a sense of, the Rams went through something like this, but tell us how this piece came together, because it's not necessarily something. Let's just say this: nobody else is writing this piece, but the more I read it, the more I saw the parallels between what the Niners are going through currently and what the Rams just endured, a couple of years ago.
Yeah, no, it's obvious when you start to look into it, and I had a sense that that's what the Rams were doing. You cover a team that plays them twice a year. You get to look in on their roster building from time to time. But I called Jordan Rodrigue, who covers the Rams for us. She's fantastic. Really does a lot of in-depth reporting. And I just kind of bounced it off of you. And she said, yes, for sure. In fact, with her sort of looking from afar into what the 49ers are doing, she had the same thought. This is exactly how the Rams went about it following the 2022 season when they won 5 games. And they were all in that season. They had won the Super Bowl the year before, and they decided to run it back. Everybody comes back, and not only that, they bring in Bobby Wagner, and they bring in a couple of other sort of high-priced veterans, and they pay them a lot of money. And it was sort of a non-Rams thing, but they felt like, okay, the core is intact. Let's go get another Super Bowl champion, Super Bowl title. And it didn't work. It fell apart, just like the 49ers 24 season did. So they started to do what is known inside their headquarters as a sprint rebuild, where you rebuild on the run. You don't totally blow it up, but you mostly blow it up, and you hope that the key players on your team, coupled with a bad schedule or a bad team schedule, means that you can still be good the year after that rebuild, but you really have a lot of wherewithal to rebuild after that, because you've erased a lot of money off of your books. You've freed up a lot of cash. That's something that the 49ers will have to do as well.
It's interesting too, because Les Snead, basically was like, hey, we don't want to call it a rebuild. We want to call it a remodel. And I can understand, because he did have Stafford, and he did have Cooper Kupp, and he did have Aaron Donald. And even though they had won the Super Bowl and they needed to get their cap in order, they also had, true, what we would all describe as kind of foundation pieces. And the Niners are kind of in that same boat, right? And they have Trent, they have Kittle, they have Bosa, they have Demo Lenore. They have some foundation pieces. I know there's an awful lot of people who are saying, man, the Niners are punting on 2025. I think that's a little dramatic. I don't know, but you've been covering this team longer than I have. When you're viewing what they've done this week in free agency, what does that tell us about 2025?
Well, it tells us that they're going to rely on their draft picks a lot more than they have in recent years. I mean, that was, the Rams were able to do their remodel because they hit on their draft picks, and some of those guys delivered right away. They've got 2 defensive ends now. They drafted 2 tackles. That's their defensive line now. And I think the 49ers are going to have to do something very similar to that. They've got Nick Bosa and then 3 question marks at that spot. So, I mean, it depends on that. Your listeners are going to know right away that the 49ers have drafted pretty well over the years, but their best picks have come later in the draft, and the early round drafts haven't panned out as well. So it's a question mark. But that defensive line in particular, looks dicey to me. I
Yeah,
mean, I don't know, at this point, you're looking at the free agents that are left, and it's like Calais Campbell and nobody else, really. Certainly at defensive tackle, there's still a few intriguing edge players available, but sort of the big losses this week were Malik Collins and Javon Hargrave, and both of whom were snapped up like that
right.
very quickly. And so that to me is the glaring position of need coming out of free agency. And I can only assume that they are looking at this draft and seeing a draft that's deep at that position and thinking they're going to get one or two guys that are going to have to step in right away, and which is always a leap of faith. So I agree with you. There's still a lot of talent on this team, but that's a glaring hole right now, and it's a position that this team, Shanahan and Lynch, have concentrated on. When they got together back in 2017, back in January of 2017, and they went over this idea of working together. Um, they came to the conclusion that they had agreement on the two most important positions to fill. They were quarterback and defensive line. And they're looking to sign their quarterback to a long-term deal right now, and they really have to rebuild that defensive line.
No question. The big question is, are how sure are we that John and Kyle and Jed and Parag are all on the same page? Are they all on the same page? I mean, I haven't been down there since the end of the year. You probably are a little bit more sourced. What do you think? I mean, if you tell me, regardless of whatever their plan is, that they're all on the same page, I have one thought about the Niners. If you tell me that no, they're actually not on the same page, I have a completely different set of thoughts about how they look going forward. What's your belief here? Do you think they're on the same page, or do you think this is like a new world order set from maybe Jed and Parag, and it's really being kind of, them saying this is the new world order, and Lynch and Shanahan have no choice but to go along with it?
Well, I mean, that's usually how it goes. John Lynch was saying all the talking points in Indianapolis last month. I mean, he's the one that started bringing up just how much cash they've spent and how this roster needs to get younger. Those are the talking points about what they're doing right now. So he's obviously on board with it. I mean, you would guess that Shanahan has been reluctant to be on board with it, and that makes sense. I mean, this is the team, after all, that in the summer was about to trade Brandon Ayuk, and Kyle Shanahan got wind of it, and allegedly raced up the stairs to yell "Stop the presses!" In a sense, stop the trade. So he's always going to side with wanting his guys, the guys that he found. I'm sure it was hard for him to trade Debo Samuel for a fifth round pick. We'll have to wait to hear from them. The next time may be at the owners' meeting later this month in Florida, when both are scheduled to talk. So I'm sure they'll have their story straight at that point. But I imagine it is difficult, especially given what I just said. That defensive line is what these guys hold, paramount. And they gave away 3 of their 4 starters from last season. And like I said, all 3 of those guys, Leonard Floyd included, were snapped up. I mean, they spent seconds on free agency before they had deals and new teams.
It's interesting. There's so many people writing so many different things. Tim Kawakami had an interesting piece yesterday where he says they could very well trade Brandon Ayuk and that they're open to potentially trading Brandon Ayuk. And at first, it seemed like like no way. That says couldn't possibly happen. Why? Because they just signed him. It's 1 year later. He's had a major injury. His value's down. This wouldn't be the time to trade him. But then Tim goes into some details where they could reclaim $110 million. And if this is all about cash, and maybe what we're seeing is a prioritization of Jed's cash, is it possible that they will move Ayuk for day 3 picks. I mean, there's a lot of speculation about the Browns. And then I thought, well, let me look at what the Browns have as far as day 3 picks. Sure enough, the Browns have 4 6-round draft choices. Those 4 6-round draft choices would be of great help to the 49ers in their efforts to rebuild. And if they can shake free of Ayuk's money, maybe the price tag on a hurt receiver with a big contract is not as high as we think. What's your sense of, do you think Ayuk's going to be here? If he was, wouldn't John Lynch have just stated that when he was asked about the rumors at the combine? He seemed to almost pour gasoline on this fire.
Yeah, he did. I mean, that was the question that sort of elicited his answer about, getting younger and all the cash that this team has spent over the years, which was really interesting. That he equated those two things. A question about trading Ayuk and the need for this team to get younger and accumulate draft picks. It also would be in keeping with that Rams rebuild. The Rams had 24 draft picks over the last 2 seasons. They didn't hit on all of them. Nobody does, but the more picks that you have, the greater those chances are. So accumulating what they've got 11 right now, accumulating a couple more, that would give you 13. That ups your chances in a draft. Like we said, that's deep at defensive end. It's deep at tight end. It's deep at defensive tackle. However, having said all that, I just don't think that the return. You mentioned a 6-round pick. Ayuk is still in his mid-20s. He obviously has a good rapport with Brock Purdy. You're signing Purdy up for a long-term contract. I would think that the small return that they could get for a guy coming off an ACL would deter any sort of trade for him. That's my thought. But this is the mode that they're in. They're in a trim the fat mode, and they had a bad experience with Ayuk last season with the negotiation, that's for sure. And there's a lot of money that they can lop off or eat up this year so that 26 and beyond are free and clear.
How would fans react if the biggest part of the return in a trade for Ayuk was Jed's money? In a sport where the team is flush with money, the franchise is worth billions. I know they may not be cash rich, and that's part of the issue maybe, but the Niners, are not a poor franchise. They're an iconic, wealthy franchise with lots and lots and lots of revenue streams. How do you think the fans would react if Ayuk was traded for, 3 6-round draft choices, and all the real gain was Jed gets out from underneath $110 million commitment? Do you think the fans would turn on him, or have they had enough success here where people could go along?
Well, it wouldn't be just Ayuk. It would be Ayuk, Debo Samuel, Kyle Juszczyk, and Dre Greenlaw.
Right.
And I think Dre Greenlaw is probably 1 or 2 on that list of kind of regrettable departures that the 49ers had this in the last week. So no, it would go over like a bag of rocks. It would be very bad, and I don't know how you would defend it either. I don't know how Kyle Shanahan could get up in front of everybody and legitimately say that, yeah, we're fighting for a Super Bowl this year, just like we always are, when they've gotten rid of all of those guys for money issues.
The Mac Jones factor. Mac is here now. What was your thought when you first heard it? Were you surprised? Did you expect it? Did you predict it maybe on a live stream or in an article somewhere? And what do you think of the personality mix? I don't really know Mac Jones. I don't know if you do either, but there was some whispers that he wasn't the most popular guy in New England's locker room a couple years ago. But I do see why Shanahan would feel that he would be a good fit. I think he's football smart. I think the one thing that's similar to Brock is I think they both process pre-snap pretty well, and they're both cerebral that can digest lots of factors. And I think that's almost a prerequisite for a Shanahan offense. But what do you think, Matt? Give me your perspective on the Jones signing.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's similar to Sam Darnold from a couple of years ago, where that somebody's got talent. He's got qualities, and you tell yourself that he got picked by a bad team, and Mac Jones played on some bad offenses. Didn't get a lot of protection, and he still did fairly well. I mean, his stats are not great, but they're not. I mean, I've seen bigger flops from first round quarterbacks. Put it that way. So you did see some of the things that may have made the 49ers interested in him in 2021. And you mentioned it, the processing. He's fairly accurate. He's got a completion percentage in the mid 60s, which again, for being on a bad team, is pretty good. You want it approaching 70, for a top tier quarterback. I think that's what Brock Purdy's is. But the rationale is that you put him on a better team, one that ideally has Ayuk and George Kittle and Christian McCaffrey catching easy passes out of the backfield, and you've got something with him. So it's interesting. I mean, people will wonder, oh, how does this affect Purdy? I don't think it does. But it does give the 49ers, I'd say, slightly better stance when it comes to the negotiating this year. Another thing that John Lynch mentioned unprompted is that Purdy is signed for 2025. He's got the last year of his rookie deal coming. And that's really the leverage that the 49ers have with him. It's like, if we don't get a deal done now, then you're just making, whatever that number is, 5 million or so, when you could be making 55 million.
It sounds like maybe the Niners this whole offseason is about the big cash outlay that they're going to throw Purdy in the midst of this deal. I got to think that the guaranteed money is going to be north of $100 million. And that's a big, and that's either straight cash from Jed's account to his, or it's spread out over a deal, but it has to be put into an escrow, which essentially means the Niners have to have that cash. Do you think that these moves are all about that big cash outlay in that contract?
Yes. That, and they're expecting to do a big deal with George Kittle as well.
Mm-hmm.
And that wasn't a cheap deal. And that was a contentious deal when they did it a few years ago. John Lynch said that they're going to do that after they get some other business out of the way. But, George Kittle was one of the few non-disappointments last year. And he really kind of carried this team for a little while. Not quite to the extent that Deebo Samuel did in 2021, but it was a statement season from him, knowing that his contract was probably going to get renegotiated this year. So, I mean, it's those two, and really anybody else that's coming down the pike. But it's going to require, as you noted, a lot of cash in hand.
You wrote a pretty good piece, I thought, about some free agents that are still available. And obviously, since you wrote this piece, a couple came off the board, including Charlie Heck,
Yeah.
who I thought Charlie Heck might be a reasonable signing. But you had Charlie Heck, you had Joe Notaboom, Tyron Smith. You had some good names here. Kazir White, I thought, is kind of an interesting name. Charles Omenihu, Azeez Ojulari, Calais Campbell. What do you think now that some of these guys have signed, I'm sure, and they're not on the market, but do you think the Niners are done, or do you think there's an Azeez Ojulari I was thinking maybe like Willie Gay as a linebacker who's from the Saints, who runs really well. I know they're wanting to add speed, but Kazir White would be great. He had a great year in Arizona. Do you see them still active in free agency, or do you think they're done?
I do see them still active, but it's going to be like what the Rams did in 23, where they wait. They make some signings in April and May and June, where they just let the market produce sort of a hidden gem there. So, I mean, I checked in on Azeez Ojulari today, and they're not interested in him. I would think that Dante Fowler would be somebody who would be a good fit. You would have Yetur Gross-Matos as sort of your base down guy, and then somebody like Fowler who's smaller, quicker, pass rush specialist could come in on passing downs. But like I said, the 49ers seem to be just much more disciplined this year, much more adamant that they're going to be frugal, and they're just going to wait. And they'll get somebody. I mean, they have to bring in, at least a couple more. You would think that they would want a veteran linebacker, for example, because they're not totally sold on D Winters at this point. And D Winters could end up being the strong side backer, the number 3 guy, which a fairly prominent role. But you would think that they would want some backstop there at that very important position, especially considering what happened at that position last year when they didn't have Dre Greenlaw. So that's got to be something that they look at in the draft, or they bring in somebody, like you said, lower to mid-priced veteran from some other team.
Niners pick 11th in the first round. Greg Cosell was on 95.7 The Game and mentioned how much he loves Walter Nolan when he watches the Ole Miss defensive tackle, who's, to me, be a great fit for the 49ers. It just seems like almost a perfect fit. And in most draft things have him going, 15 to 28, somewhere in there. Some have him in the second round. What do you think is, have you come up with the draft crush yet? And do you see defensive tackle as the primary need? What do you think of maybe a trade back for a few spots and taking Walter Nolan 10, 12 spots before he's projected, or maybe a Kenneth Grant or somebody of that ilk? Do you look at defensive tackle as the primary need, or is offensive tackle still the primary need, or is it something I'm not thinking of?
Well, there's defensive end too. Defensive tackle is funny because you've got Mason Graham, and then there seems to be a fairly decent gap after him. And then there are a lot of guys. I mean, you and I have talked about it. The guy from South Carolina, the guy from Toledo, there are a couple from Ole Miss, et cetera, et cetera. I love the defensive tackle from Indiana, CJ West. I just think he's got 49ers written all over him, and they could get him in the 5th or the 6th round. So it may be a position where it's your biggest position of need, but you let the first round go with somebody else or a different position, and then you get those defensive tackles later on in the draft. But it's so funny that you mentioned Kenneth Grant, because you watch the Mason Graham film, and Grant pops out just as much as Graham does. And he takes on double teams, and he provides a physical presence there that the 49ers didn't have last year, and that you could complement with some of these other guys. Darius Alexander in the 2nd round, for example. That would be a mean combination if you were able to draft both of those guys. So he's really interesting. He's somebody that no one's really talking about, but I bet he's going to end up going higher than we think he is. And then the other guy is Mason Graham.
Sure, who might fall.
Not a huge guy, might fall. Maybe Ashton Genty goes in the top 10. And if that happens, then somebody drops out of the top 10. And, there's a fairly good chance that that's Graham. A little stubbier than you'd like. I mean, really active, really knows leverage and uses his quickness well. I think he'd be a great fit for the 49ers. But you can see why teams might be a little bit hesitant to take him with a top 10 pick.
There's a lot of people calling for the Niners to go after Garrett Bradbury. And yet, if you talk to Chris Forster, as we do, Chris Forster is a big fan of Jake Brendel. And he sees, he makes Brendel sound really good. Pro Football Focus clearly is not singing from the same songbook, because they don't see Brendel the same way. What's your best guess? I mean, they can't run it in short yardage. They got rid of their fullback. They're moving on from Banks. Do they move on from Brendel for a guy like Bradbury? Do they move on from Brendel in the draft? Or is it Jake Brendel at center? And, he seems very underpowered, but and they didn't have, it's almost like Shanahan quit on even trying to run the ball inside the 5-yard line late in the year. And he had some pretty decent backs. So What do you make? What sense can you make of Brendel's future? It seems like if you talk to the fans, they want him out. If you talk to the Niners, they seem like they almost view him as a strength.
Yeah, it's a real big discrepancy there when you talk to Firster about him. Remember they brought in Matt Hennessy at the end of
Right.
the season too, and they gave him a 2-year deal. So he's absolutely in the mix. I don't know if he's in the mix to compete for the starting spot or whether he's the top backup or what. But that was a strategic move. In fact, you could argue that the 49ers started making some of their off-season moves this offseason back in December when they got who's the guy? Austin Pleasance. That was when Charlie Heck came in. I agree with you. I thought that Heck, of all those guys that I put on the still available free agent list, I thought Charlie Heck's probably going to be the guy that they sign because he played pretty well, and you could certainly see him as the swing tackle. And he's still young. He's like 26 or so. So, some of this was done, back in December. They were already looking ahead to the 2025 off season. And I would think that Hennessy is part of that. Don't see the 49ers drafting a center early and then making him the guy. I just think it's not their style. It's too much to put on a rookie's shoulders. You're protecting a guy that you're probably going to pay a lot of money to in Brock Purdy. I just think it's going to be a defense heavy draft. Just look at the Rams' last few drafts. I think it's going to be exactly like what the Rams have done.
Couple quick hitters for you before you jet. Juan Thornhill supposedly met with the Niners yesterday. Once upon a time, he was a pretty good player. He won 2 Super Bowls. I know he tore an ACL. I know he had a calf injury last year. Is Thornhill a free safety option for them? How viable do you think that one is?
He's a former UVA Wahoo, so
That's
I've been
right.
watching Juan Thornhill for years. I love Juan Thornhill. It seems like they've got the safety position sewn up right now. With Malik Mustafa, Jair Brown. George Odom is still on the team. They just signed a guy from the Giants. He's come in. So
Richie Grant.
I don't think that Thornhill is going to be signed. It might be something like what happened with Tashawn Gibson, where he's sort of on their Rolodex in case something happens, and he can be signed at any point. There's another. I know I'm giving you all the UVA guys. There's another UVA safety, probably the only draftable UVA guy this year is named Jonas Sanker, Sanker. He's fantastic. And he's great on special teams, and is probably like a 4th to 6th round pick. That's who they should be bringing in. He would immediately help special teams, and I bet he'll be starting by the end of the year.
Is Tabor Peppers moving on? Is it related in any way to his little dust up with Debo, or people suggested that that may have impacted his tenure here with the 49ers. Do you think are they related or not related?
I'd say they would be related if Debo were still here, but
Right.
problem solved.
Right.
I would say it's more related to Jake Moody. That's just a guess. Not to say that Moody and Pepper didn't get along, but that the new special teams coordinator, Brant Boyer, came in, and there was something that he didn't like about the snapping that could be improved. I'm the wrong guy to talk about it. I'm sure Kyle Shanahan will tell you he's the wrong guy to talk about it because it's just such a specialty. Like they're counting rotations on the ball, Larry, as it goes back to the holder, and they're measuring it in just the most minute, time differences. So that's my only guess there, that this is Jake Moody related. People are wondering why Moody's still on the roster. The 49ers have basically said that he's going to stay on the roster, but that they might give him competition. That might be sort of the next free agent that you see them signing is a kicker who can at least push him a little bit in the spring and summer.
Last one, and we appreciate your time, Matt Barrows, stopping by from The Athletic. There's a lot of people probably asking you the same questions that I've been getting, the same questions that a lot of people who cover the Niners have been getting the last week, which is, oh my God, what's going on? Is Jed getting more involved? Is this a nightmare situation? Tim Kawakami described this as a purge this week. For the Niner fan that's listening tonight on KMBR, who's like, you know what? I'm deathly afraid of Jed and Parag kind of pushing John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan aside and taking this franchise to the depths of who knows what, the Chip Kelly era, the Jim Tomsula era, the Mike Nolan era, the Mike Singletary era. If there's Niner fans who are like panicked about these moves, thinking that Jed's going to lead this team down an ugly road, is there anything that you could tell us that would make us not fear that? Or fear that less, maybe?
Well, the story that I wrote about the Rams, I mean, the Rams were worse in 22 than the 49ers were in 24. They were 5-12. The whole staff, McVay and Les Snead got on board with a plan to really pare down that roster, make it leaner. And really, they were left with less talent than the 49ers have now. And yet we're able to rebound from that 5-12 season by going 10-7, making the playoffs. And they made the playoffs again last year and went into the divisional round. Having said that, they executed on that plan. They had a plan, they did it, and they came through with some really good draft picks. Really kind of productive guys. And so that's what the 49ers onus is now. They're executing the trimming part of it pretty ruthlessly. They have to be able to execute the adding part just as well as Los Angeles did. And that starts next month with the draft.
It's a great point. I always tell people, hey, anybody can take a sledgehammer to your kitchen and demo it. You know what I mean? I can get anybody to rip out my cabinets and rip out my countertops, but it takes a contractor with a plan and some ingenuity and some talent to actually build that thing back into a kitchen again. And I agree with you. I think that's why I wanted to have you on, because I really think this Rams parallel, if people haven't read Matt's latest article in The Athletic, sign up for The Athletic, get this article, read it. And I think it will go a great distance to calming your fears, or at least providing a template for a plan, which if you're sitting there going, what's the plan? What's the plan? I think Matty nailed it. I think the Ram plan is their plan. And I think we're going to see it carried out. Doesn't mean it's going to work, because they still got to build it up. But I think you illustrated correctly. This is the plan this is the template that they're copying, and we'll see where it goes. Matty, awesome stuff. Everybody order The Athletic, support Matty, support The Athletic. Matt, thanks for jumping on KMBR. We appreciate you.
Thanks, Larry.
Matt Barrows from The Athletic. We got more straight ahead. It's Niners Nightly on the Sports Leader.